So this course is how to inspect the attic insulation, ventilation, and interior course. Lot of great, lot of variation in this course that we're going to be able to find a lot of interesting stuff. So again, starting out with the InterNACHI SOP. Inspectors shall inspect the insulation in unfinished spaces, including attics, crawl spaces, foundation areas, ventilation of unfinished spaces including attics, crawl spaces, and foundation areas, and mechanical exhaust systems in kitchen, bathrooms, and laundry area. The inspector shall describe the type of insulation observed and the approximate average depth of insulation observed at the unfinished attic floor or the roof structure. So that is one difference between our state SOP and the InterNACHI SOP is that in our state SOP, we are not required to give you an approximate average depth of insulation. So again, just make sure you're at least meeting your state recommendations. Inspector is not required to enter the attic or any unfinished spaces that are not readily accessible or where entry could cause damage or, in the inspector's opinion, pose a safety hazard. Move, touch, or disturb insulation. Move, touch, or disturb vapor retarders. Break or otherwise damage the surface finish or weather seal on or around access panels or covers. Identify the composition or R value of insulation material. Activate thermostatically operated fans. Determine the types of materials used in insulation or wrapping of pipes, ducts, jackets, boilers, or wiring, and determine the adequacy of ventilation. And then for the interior, doors, windows, and interior, inspectors shall inspect a representative number of doors and windows by opening and closing them, floors, walls, and ceilings, stairs, steps, landings, stairways, and ramps, railings, guards, handrails, and garage vehicle doors and the operation of garage vehicle door openers using normal operating controls. The inspector shall describe a garage vehicle door as manually operated or installed with a garage door opener. The inspector shall report as in need of correction, improper spacing between intermediate balusters, spindles, and rails for steps, stairways, guards, and railings, photoelectric safety sensors, and how do I hide this? You know what? I do not know. Here. I cannot actually oh, here we go. Inspector shall report as in need of correction photoelectric safety sensors that did not operate properly and any window that was obviously fogged or displayed other evidence of broken seal. So again, that's the difference between my SOP and InterNACHI SOP is that the InterNACHI SOP does not or does have the inspector shall report as in need of correction, this number 3, whereas my state SOP does not have those things. So just make sure you're following your SOP. All right. Inspector is not required to inspect paint, wallpaper, window treatments, or finish treatments, inspect floor coverings or carpeting, inspect central vacuum systems, inspect for safety glazing, inspect security systems or components, evaluate the fastening of islands, countertops, cabinets, sink tops, or fixtures, move furniture, stored items, or any coverings such as carpets or rugs in order to inspect the concealed floor structure, move suspended ceiling tiles, inspect or move any household appliances, inspect or operate equipment housed in the garage except as otherwise noted, verify or certify the proper operation of any pressure activated auto reverse or related safety feature of a garage door, or operate or evaluate any security bar release and opening mechanisms, whether interior or exterior, including their compliance with local, state, or federal standards. All right. Oh, and a few more here. So operate any system. Inspector is not required to operate any system, appliance, or component that requires the use of special keys, codes, combinations, or devices. Operate or evaluate self-cleaning oven cycles, tilt guards, latches, or signal lights. Inspect microwave ovens or test leakage from microwave ovens. Operate or examine any sauna, steam generating equipment, kiln, toaster, ice maker, coffee maker, can opener, bread warmer, blender, instant hot water dispenser, or other small ancillary appliances or devices. We're not required to inspect elevators. inspect remote controls, inspect appliances, inspect items not permanently installed, discover firewall compromises, inspect pools, spas, or fountains, determine the adequacy of whirlpool or spa jets, water force, or bubble effects, or determine the structural integrity or leakage of pools or spas. All right, now we're out of the uh, okay, let me see here. Okay, now I'm on the right page here. All right, so um, heat energy and insulation are related to each other. One important reason we need to understand how heat moves is because warm air can carry moisture, and warm, moist air needs to be controlled in relation to building envelope. Uncontrolled movement of warm air and moisture can cause a lot of problems. Heat needs to be controlled to keep the occupants of the home comfortable. When a home is well insulated, your client will save on energy costs. There are essentially three ways that heat moves from one area to another. When bodies of unequal temperatures are near each other, heat leaves one body and goes to the other. Heat moves from the hotter body and the colder body absorbs it. The greater the difference in temperature, the greater the rate of flow of heat. Heat moves from one body to another in the following ways: radiation, conduction, and convection. Oh, wrong way. Radiation is the transfer of heat energy by electromagnetic wave motion. Heat is transferred in direct rays. It travels in a straight line from the source of heat to a body. The closer you are to a hot object, the warmer you'll feel. The intensity of the heat radiated from the hot object decreases as your distance from the object increases. You'll feel cool in a room that has a cold floor, walls, and ceiling. The amount of heat lost from your body in that room depends on the relative temperature of the objects in that room. The colder the floor is relative to the temperature of your feet, the greater the heat loss from your body will be as you continue to stand there. If the floor, walls, and ceiling of that room are relatively warmer than your body, then heat will be radiated to your body from those objects or surfaces. Radiant heat emits in all directions. Radiant heating in residential buildings includes the piping and electrical wiring in the floors, walls, and ceilings. Reflective materials are commonly used in radiant heat emitting system in order to direct or control where the heat is emitted. Conduction is the transfer of heat from one molecule to another or through one substance to another. It is heat that moves from one body to another by direct contact. For example, heat is transferred by conduction from a boiler heat exchanger to the water passing through it. When an air conditioner is operating properly, the liquid line should feel warm to the touch and the suction line should feel cool. Heat is a form of energy, and when that heat comes into contact with matter, it makes the atoms and molecules move. When atoms and molecules move, they collide with other atoms and molecules and make them move too. This movement transfers heat through matter. Convection is understood by most people by the phrase heat rises. Convection is the transfer of heat by warming the air next to a hot surface and then moving that warm air. It's the transfer of heat by the motion of the heated matter itself. The air moves from one place to another, carrying heat along with it. Since warm air is lighter and cool air around that is lighter than the cool air around it, the warm air or heat rises. Warm fluids tend to rise while the surrounding fluids fall. This rising and falling motion tends to form loops or convective loops where warm air rises and cool air falls. Early warm air furnaces, called gravity furnaces, operate by the principles of convective loops. In a gravity system, the warm air rises and cool air falls, and this is how the gravity warm air heating system circulates air. When a certain amount of air is heated up, it expands and takes up more space. In other words, hot air is less dense than cold air. Any substance that is less dense than the fluid, gas or liquid, of its surroundings will float. Hot air floats on cold air because it is less dense, just as a piece of wood floats because it is less dense than water. Warm air is often described as weighing less than cool air. Warm air rises and cool air falls. The weight per unit volume of air decreases as its temperature increases. And conversely, the weight of per unit The weight per unit volume of air increases as temperature decreases. Inside a wall cavity, there can be a convective loop where cool and warm air are moving around inside the wall cavity. If warm, moist air comes into contact with the cold surface of that wall assembly, then condensation may form inside the wall. As another example, an old gravity furnace heats the air. Let's see, let me scroll down here. The old gravity furnace heats the air. The air gets lighter and rises out of the heating system. Cool air enters the heating system and pushes or displaces the warm rising air. The warm air rises through warm air ducts or pipes, often called stacks, that are inside the walls. The warm air rises up through the building. The warm air enters a room through the supply registers on the wall or the floor. The cool air falls out of the room and may return through a return grill and travel back through return ducts to the heating system. Some houses with old gravity heating systems may not have a lot of ducts and pipes, but may rely on large openings in the floors covered with iron grates or grills that allow cool air to fall down through the building. The cool air is allowed to simply fall back to the furnace, hence the name gravity warm air heating system. The air circulation in a house with a gravity warm air heating system depends on the temperature difference between the warm air rising and the cool air falling. The greater the temperature differences, the greater the speed of the air circulating. Water vapor may move in three ways: air transportation, diffusion through materials, and thermal diffusion. Of these three, air movement accounts for more than 98% of all water vapor movement in building cavities. The illustration shows water vapor movement by diffusion and air transport. Air naturally moves from high pressure areas to lower pressure areas by the easiest path possible, generally through any available hole or crack in the building envelope. Moisture transfer by air currents happens quickly and carefully and permanently air sealing any unintended paths for air movement in and out of the house is very effective moisture control strategy. The other two driving forces, diffusion through materials and heat transfer, are much slower processes. Most common building materials slow moisture diffusion to a large degree, although they never stop it completely. Insulation also helps reduce heat transfer or flow. The problem is that there are ways to control vapor diffusion that are ineffective at controlling air transported moisture, and vice versa. An effective an effectively built wall is designed to control both vapor diffusion and air transportation at the same time in relation to the climate of the house's location. Vapor diffusion is how moisture in a vapor state moves through a material because of the difference in pressure, known as the pressure gradient, or a difference in temperature, known as the thermal gradient. Vapor diffusion is not air movement. Vapor diffusion is water vapor moving through a material from a high pressure to a low pressure. Oh, excuse me, or from the warm side of a wall to the cool side of the wall. Moisture and air will move from high pressure to low pressure or from high temperature to low temperature only if the air that is moving actually contains water vapor. Thermal or heat diffusion happens when moisture in a vapor state moves from a warm part of the assembly to the cold part. The second law of thermodynamics explains how water vapor or moisture can be pressure and thermally driven from high or hot to low or cold. Diffusion is an important factor to understanding, but diffusion is a slow process. Air, however, can move and flow quickly and in large volumes. Air transportation accounts for more than 98% of all water vapor movement in building cavities. Air naturally moves from a high pressure area to a lower one by the easiest path possible, generally through any available hole or crack in the building envelope. Moisture transfer by air currents is very fast, in the range of several hundred cubic feet of air per minute. Thus, to control air movement, a house should have any unintended air paths, holes, gaps, cracks, separations, carefully and permanently sealed by a practice referred to in this course as air sealing. Diffusion through materials is a much slower process. Most common building materials slow moisture diffusion to a large degree, although they can never stop it completely. The illustration shows a wall with a hole in it. Significantly more water vapor travels through a wall by air leakage than by diffusion. The arrow represents air leakage through a 1-inch hole. About 30 quarts of water can travel through a wall during a heating season. As inspectors, we need to look for air leakage through holes. The laws of physics govern how moisture reacts within various temperature conditions. The study of moist air properties is technically referred to as psychrometrics. A psychrometric chart is used by professionals to determine at what temperature and moisture concentration water vapor begins to condense. The temperature and moisture concentration at which water vapor begins to condense is the dew point. By understanding how to find the dew point, you will better understand how to inspect for and diagnose moisture problems in a house. Relative humidity, often referred to as RH, refers to the amount of moisture contained in a quantity of air compared to the maximum amount of moisture the air could hold at the same temperature. As air warms, its ability to hold water vapor increases. This capacity decreases as air cools. For example, according to the psychrometric chart, air at 68 degrees Fahrenheit with 0.216 ounces of water per pound of air versus the same air at 59 degrees Fahrenheit holds about 28% more moisture. The moisture that the air can no longer hold condenses on the first cold surface it encounters, the dew point. If this surface is within the exterior wall cavity, wet insulation and framing will be the result. In addition to air movement, temperature and moisture content can also be controlled. Since insulation reduces heat transfer or flow, it also moderates the effect of temperature across the building's and building envelope's cavity. In most U.S. climates, properly installed vapor diffusion retarders can be used to reduce the amount of moisture transfer. Except in deliberately ventilated spaces such as attics, properly installed insulation and vapor diffusion retarders work together to reduce the opportunity for condensation to form in a house's ceilings, walls, or floors. When moist air touches a cold surface, some of the moisture may leave air and condense or become a liquid. If the moisture condenses inside a wall or in an inaccessible attic, you may not be able to see the water, but it will be causing numerous problems. When a wall is insulated, the temperature of the space inside that wall is changed. A surface inside that wall, such as the plywood sheathing behind the siding, can become much colder in the wintertime than it was before the wall was insulated. This cold surface could be the place where moisture traveled through the wall. Moisture traveling through the wall could condense and cause trouble. The same situation could happen in an attic. So I'm going to give you a quick example of an observation that I had from a client. Um, so there was a new construction house. House had never been lived in. Homeowner moved in. She moved, I think they had a six-person family moving into a three-bedroom house. So there was a lot of people in there. And she had teenagers to college students. And so as the homeowner lived in the home through the summer, no problems. But as winter approached and they started to, do a lot of indoor cooking, taking showers and all those things, just normal living, but with six people in a smaller, like 2,000 square foot house, the water vapor that they were producing was a lot. It was really great. And then we had an especially cold winter for a few weeks this last winter. And I get a phone call. I think it was in December, and she called me up and she said, "Hey, Andy, I'm having condensation issues in my house." I'm like, "Okay, that's strange. You're on a slab house, brand new construction." She said that she called the builder out a few times, and they came out and they were like, "It's you just need to stop, cooking so much. You need to stop taking so many showers." That was their explanation to her, is like, that water is condensing inside the house because you're using so much water in the house. And she didn't like that answer, so it turns out um, the north side of the house, which is where their living room was, um, the baseboards at the bottom, they were getting condensation that was building up on that baseboard. And so the only thing that we could really come up with was why that was happening was it's a north-facing wall, so we're getting the super cold Arctic blast air, that we were getting. It was blowing against that north wall. They had uh, I just forgot the term for it. They had weep holes in that foundation wall that did not have like a rope or didn't have any plastic insert. It was just a hole. Well, no, I think. the vertical portion of that brick, I can't remember the term for it, but the vertical mortar line of that brick was just exposed for the height of that brick, right? And so we were getting that super cold Arctic air that was blowing in. It was actually, we think it was blowing in through the weep holes, and it was making the interior of that wall super cold. And they had really warm, moist air inside the home from all those people living in there, and so it created a super cold surface. And in Arkansas, we don't use sill gaskets, or you're not required to use sill gaskets. So so when that air was coming in through the weep holes, it was basically the air was uninterrupted underneath the sill plate, and it was coming into contact with the bottom with the floor trim or the baseboard, and that surface was super cold, and you had the super moist air, and it was just contacting that, and it was condensing, and it was starting to, create moisture damage issues along that baseboard. So that's what we determined. So their fix for that was basically to seal, or the builder's fix for that was to seal up those weep holes and to stop that super cold air from getting in. Um, Unfortunately, the only other thing that you could try to do was they were going to try to take the baseboard off and run a bead of caulk, and try to seal the sill plate to the concrete. But all that's going to do is it's going to push that cold surface inside that wall instead of it coming out to the baseboard. So they they didn't end up doing that, but if they were to do that, you would potentially start to create moisture inside the wall instead of on the inside of the wall where it could be easily addressed. So this is just a good example of that. So, oh wait, let's see. Okay. Um, Protection from water damage. So water may be essential to life, but as a destructive force, water can diminish the value of your client's home or building. An inspector is required to report any present conditions or clear indications of active water penetration. Um, So there's a plethora of locations that water can come from. You have windows and doors, the roof, the foundation and exterior walls. Like I said, we're not required to use sill gaskets here, so water or airflow and air carrying moisture with it can easily get into a house. Plumbing, HVAC system, flashings and sealants not correctly applied, uh, bathroom vents, attic vents, ridge vents, HVAC system, humidity, normally damp areas, expansion joints in the brick, interior finish materials, um, exterior walls, storage areas, that type of stuff. So quick action if water intrusion occurs. Water shutoff valves should be readily accessible and identified so that the water supply can be easily turned off in the event of a plumbing leak. If water intrusion does occur, damage can be minimized by addressing the problem quickly and thoroughly. Inspectors should help their clients identify all water shutoff valves. And then water intrusion that's not so obvious. Water damage that is visible during an inspection should be reported to your client. It is not possible to see what happens to the attic space during the winter if you're inspecting the property during the summer, as in my case. There are a lot of things that are beyond the scope of a typical home inspection, including determining how moisture is controlled in the house, especially at the wall assemblies. The right illustration shows brown stains on the ceiling wall may be caused by moisture condensing on cold roof sheathing in the attic. The water vapor has moved into the unfinished attic space through open spaces around leaky bathroom vents, leaky light fixtures, etc. This illustration shows the potential of complexity of moisture movement, air movement, temperature, condensation, and resulting indications that may be observed during a visual-only home inspection. Heating and cooling. Let's see, where are we at on time? Yeah, okay. Heating and cooling account for 50 to 70% of energy used in the average home in the United States. Inadequate insulation and air leakage cause a lot of wasted energy in most homes. Insulation helps us save money, helps to conserve our limited energy resources, makes a house comfortable, maintains uniform temperature throughout the house, makes a house warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Insulation provides resistance to heat flow. The more heat flow resistance the insulation provides, the lower the heating and cooling costs. Heat flows naturally from a warmer space to a cooler space. In the cold winter, this heat flow moves directly from all heated living spaces to adjacent unheated spaces such as attics, garages, basements, underfloor crawl spaces, and even to the outdoors. Heat flow can also move indirectly through interior ceilings, walls, and floors wherever there is a difference in temperature. During the cooling season, heat flows from the exterior to the interior of the building. To keep the occupants of the building comfortable, the heat lost in the winter must be replaced by the heating system, and the heat gained in the summer must be removed by the cooling system. A properly insulated home will decrease this heat flow by providing an effective resistance to the flow of heat. Insulation in the form of bats, blankets, loose fill, and low density foams all work by limiting air movement. The still air inside the insulation is an effective insulator because it eliminates convection. Still air also has low conduction, so heat doesn't flow very well via conduction through insulation. Some foams are filled with special gases that provide additional resistance to heat flow. Reflective insulation limits heat that travels in the form of radiation. Some reflective insulation also reduces air movement, but not as much as other types of insulation. Don't confuse insulation's ability to limit air movement with air sealing. Insulation reduces air movement only within the space it occupies. It cannot limit air movement through other pathways nearby. For example, the insulation in the wall cavity does not affect the air leakage that might take place around a window frame. Adding insulation will likely not have the same effect as air sealing. Insulation's resistance to heat flow is measured or rated in terms of thermal resistance, better known as R value. The higher the R value, the greater the insulating effectiveness. The R value depends on the type of insulation, which includes its material, thickness, and density. The effectiveness of insulation materials' resistance to heat flow also depends on how and where the insulation is installed. For example, insulation that is compressed will not provide its full rated R value. The overall R value of a wall or ceiling will be somewhat different from the R value of the insulation itself because heat flows more readily through studs, joists, and other building materials, in a phenomenon known as thermal bridging. In addition, uh, insulation that fills building cavities densely enough to reduce airflow can also reduce convective heat loss. The illustration shows how thick an insulation type must be in order to achieve the same R value. So this is the diagram that I was explaining earlier about the difference between the Department of Energy recommendations and your local and state recommendations. So we'll kind of see if you can find your location. In Arkansas, we're right up here. I'm right up here in this very top left corner of Arkansas. Um, it's and you can see that 2 counties below me, we change into a different and a different climate zone. So we're more like the climate zone of the majority of Missouri, but at least in my area, and then the rest of the states in a lower or a less um, lower R value zone in the rest of the state. So the amount of insulation or R value needed in a home will depend on its climate, type of heating, or its depend on its climate, type of heating and cooling system, and the particular part of the house where the insulation is installed. The U.S. Department of Energy has recommendations for new and existing homes in relation to R value. The insulation recommendations for ceilings, wood frame walls, floors, foundation walls, crawl space walls, and slabs have been increased overall and generally exceed those required by most building codes. The Department of Energy's range of recommendations is based on comparing future energy savings to the current cost of installing insulation. You can use the map and the tables in this section for new and existing homes as a reference guide for your inspection and evaluation of their insulation. If you observe insulation materials used in layers, such as framing cavity insulation and insulated sheathing, the material can be summed to compute the component can be summed to compute the component R value. Climate zones are used to determine applicable requirements in home energy efficiency design and construction. The basement walls, exterior walls, floors, roof, and any other building elements that enclose conditioned space or provides a boundary between conditioned space and unconditioned space is called the building thermal envelope. So let's see here. So you can see, so my zone is zone 4, not marine. So you can, let me see here. Here we go. Spotlight. Um, So this is going to be mine. We are in zone or climate zone 4, and you can see our R value for the Department of Energy is 49, when in fact our minimum R value is R30 in our ceilings. So again, that just shows you the difference. I have heard where I think our energy efficiency code is about to be updated. I think they've approved it, but they have not implemented it where it's going to raise it to R38 in the ceiling as a standard instead of R30. Um, all right, so let me see if I can hide that. There we go. And let's get back over here. Where are we at? Let's see, insulation that is compressed will not provide its full rated R value. The overall R value of a wall or ceiling will be somewhat different from the R value of the insulation itself because some heat flows around the insulation through studs and joists. If denser, heavier insulation is installed on top of lighter insulation in the attic floor area, the overall value may be different. If R19 batt insulation that is sized for 6¼ inches is stuffed inside a 5½ inch wall cavity, the effectiveness is decreased. If the insulation is installed in a wall with electric wires or plumbing pipes, the fiberglass batt insulation may be compressed. It is important that the insulation is properly installed to achieve its maximum R value. Insulation in between studs in a wall does not restrict the heat flow through those studs. This heat flow is called thermal bridging. The overall R value of that wall may be different from the R value of the insulation itself. It is recommended that the insulation installed in the attic covers the top of the attic floor joists. It is also recommended that insulation sheathing be installed on stud walls. Uh, Wood studs can transfer energy through the wall assembly. Metal studs can transfer energy much better than wood studs can. As a result, metal walls' overall R value can be as low as half of the insulation's R value. You may be asked by your client, does the home I'm about to buy need more insulation? Unless the home was specifically constructed for energy efficiency, the homeowner can probably reduce the home's energy bills by adding more insulation. But air sealing is more critical. The homeowner must air seal in order to actually reduce or stop the air movement or leakage from the house. Check the attics, walls, and floors adjacent to an unheated space, like a garage or a basement. The structural elements are usually exposed in these areas, which makes it easy to see what type of insulation is installed and to measure its depth or thickness. Inspect and measure the thickness of any visible insulation. If the crawl space isn't ventilated, it may have insulation in the perimeter wall. If the house is relatively new, it may have insulation outside the basement or foundation walls. Adding insulation may require hiring a professional contractor. If the house is old, the electrical system should be checked by an electrician if the wiring is degraded, overloaded, or uses knob and tube wiring. It is hazardous to add insulation when conditions such as these exist. Adding thermal insulation within a closed cavity around wires could cause the wires to overheat. Code does not allow the installation of loose fill, rolled, or foam in place insulation around knob and tube wiring. Adding insulation in a mobile home is complex and usually requires special expertise. Adding insulation over existing insulation should not include a vapor diffusion retarder between the two layers. Here's a quick example of why you should have or you could make a recommendation to your client or on your own home, is that if you do add insulation in your home, it was very common practice, especially in my area, that if an electrical junction box was added inside of an attic, they would leave the cover off, so they would not put a cover on. Well, then they decide to go in and blow in new insulation without checking and dealing with all of the electrical before they blew the insulation in. And so this client, I think they had rock wool insulation. It was an older home, rock wool insulation. Of course, it had settled, and you could see a lot of the electrical splice boxes. In my inspection, I recommended that the splice boxes, splice boxes be secured closed. Um, and the homeowner did not do that. They had an energy audit. They came in and put in new insulation. Nobody covered up the insulation, or nobody covered the boxes. And so, like 6 months later, I get a call from the client. Hey, we had a house fire. We're not blaming you. Your report was great, but will you come and check out and make sure there's nothing else that we might be potentially missing. So I went over there, double checked, and she confirmed that when they had the new insulation, it was uh, cell or yeah, cellulose, blown cellulose, so ground up newspaper. They filled a lot of the electrical splice boxes that were open. And because they had older electrical wires in there, it was producing a lot of heat. And you packed insulation on top of that. Well, it created so much heat that it actually started a fire in their attic, and it burned like a quarter of their house on the backside. So again, making sure that the electrical is solid, everything is prepped and ready. And if you don't, you do see new insulation and they blew in new insulation, you can still see open splice boxes. I would highly recommend, you call those things out and make sure that your client is protected from a potential fire in their attic. So check the attic. At unfinished attic floors, be careful where you step. Walk only on the joists if you choose to walk in an attic space. Walk only on the joists so that you do not fall through the ceiling below. If there is insulation installed and it's near the top of the joist, then a good practice is to install new bats perpendicular to existing ones. That will help cover the tops of the joists and reduce thermal bridging through framing members. Um, so back when I first started, I was gung-ho inspector. I prided myself on getting into the nooks and the crannies, like, belly crawling through insulation and doing all those things, until you step on a few can lights and you push the can lights out of the ceiling. So I have since stopped that. I follow my SOP and what is required of the SOP as far as walking attic spaces and not disturbing insulation. Um, and just to make sure, because you don't know what's underneath that insulation. And they usually attach, at least the old school can lights, pre-LED, they attach the can lights to the ceiling joist. And a lot of times that can light was just slightly above the top of that ceiling joist. And so, you feel like even if you did have a little path, going through the attic, you might still, the what do you call that? The crown of your foot? Is that what that's called? Crown of your foot. You step on the middle of that joist, but your toe and your heel still go down on both sides of that joist, and you could potentially, step on something, can light or whatever, and push that down into the ceiling. So just, make sure you're safe, follow your SOP, and don't put yourself in danger or the the home in any danger. Uh, Chances. Attic access. The attic access hatch or door should be insulated. A non-insulated attic door will reduce energy savings substantially. Ideally, the attic access will be located in an unconditioned part of the house if possible. Otherwise, the attic access should have weather stripping and insulation. The access opening could be covered by an insulated cover box. There should be an access opening to all attic spaces that exceed 30 square feet, have a vertical height of 30 inches or more. The rough framed opening should be at least 22 inches by 30 inches. It should be located in a hallway or other readily accessible location. An attic access that is located in a closed closet is often inaccessible due to permanent shelving installed. For ceiling access openings, there should be at least 30 inches of headroom in the attic space above the access opening measured vertically from the underside of the roof framing members to the top of the ceiling framing members. Um, on new construction, I still see it all the time. Our local AHJ inspectors, code inspectors, do not call out uninsulated attic access hatches, doors, and whatnot on the basically anywhere. So none of our local AHJ inspectors call out missing insulation or missing weather stripping on attic access hatches on inside of the home. Um, so that is something that I call out consistently on new construction is, not weather stripped, not insulated, because like they said, a very substantial amount of energy is lost through those openings. Um, 40, we got 10 more minutes here. Let's see. If there is a plumbing or electrical system or mechanical equipment in the attic space or in the underfloor crawl space, then the space should be accessible for inspection, service, and removal. Uh, Again, on older homes, you're going to find that this is not the case. A lot of times, maybe equipment was smaller whenever they installed it, and now newer equipment is much larger and more difficult to get in. Um, so, just keep those things in mind. A lot of times when you'll find that an attic access hole is too small to get equipment out, a lot of times the equipment is left in the attic and abandoned while new equipment is installed right next to it, because they will piece it through the attic opening, and they just don't pull out the old abandoned equipment. So for those things, I always call out abandoned equipment in crawl spaces and in attic spaces. One, because it is a failure point. You could. There might still be electrical hooked up to it. There could be plumbing still hooked up to it. It's a place where animals can use to nest and hide, all those kinds of things. So anytime I see anything abandoned in attic and crawl spaces, I always recommend it to be removed. Um, in addition to an adequately sized opening, a passageway should be provided in an attic. The passageway should be made of solid flooring. Again, that is another thing that is kind of hit and miss. Some, like I would say, probably 60 to 70% of our code inspectors call out missing walkways or inadequate walkways, whereas some don't call it out at all. In addition to, let me see, there should be an opening to the space and a clear, unobstructed passageway large enough to allow removal of the mechanical appliance. The opening should be at least 22 by 30 inches. The opening should be large enough for a person to get through and for equipment to be removed. The passageway beyond the opening should be at least 30 inches high and at least 22 inches wide and not more than 20 feet in length when measured along the center line of the passageway from the opening to the appliance. There are some exceptions. There are some exceptions. The passageway flooring should be at least 24 inches wide. Um, a service area is required in front of the mechanical equipment. Again, that is often missed where they might put a walkway, but then they set the HVAC system off of the walkway and they don't complete that landing that goes from the walkway to the unit itself. That's a very common observation. Let's see. So the dimensions should be at least 30 inches by 30 inches in front of the unit. A light fixture should be installed to illuminate the passageway and the mechanical appliance. A control switch should be installed near the entryway to the passageway, and a control switch could also equal a plug. Oftentimes you'll find one or the other, either a control switch or a plug-in. An electrical receptacle should be installed at or near the mechanical appliance to allow for safe and convenient maintenance and servicing of the appliance. Attic pull-down stairs. Uh, Attic pull-down ladders, also called attic pull-down stairs, are collapsible ladders that are permanently attached to the attic floor. Occupants can use these ladders to access their attics without being required to carry a portable ladder. Common defects for attic pull-down stairs observed in consistently shoddy work that rarely meets safety standards. Some of the more common defective conditions observed by inspectors include Cut bottom cord of the structural truss. Often homeowners will cut through a structural member in the field while installing a pull-down ladder, unknowingly weakening the structure. Structural members should not be modified in the field without an engineer's approval. Fastened with improper or missing nails or screws. If you've been in the industry any amount of time, I think it's a picture that most of us take where there's actually a sticker on the attic pull down stairs that says drive nail through bracket, and they'll drive a nail right next to the bracket or not through the bracket, or not through that side of the pull down stair framing at all. And so, that's always a fun picture to include in your reports is the actual very clearly labeled requirement to install mounting hardware through the metal corner brackets and through the hinge brackets on the side. Um, Also, what is used improper is using drywall screws or deck screws rather than the standard 16D penny nails or quarter-inch by 3-inch lag screws. Nails and screws that are intended for other purposes may have reduced shear strength and may not support pull-down ladders. Fastened with insufficient number of nails or screws. Manufacturers provide a certain number of nails with instructions that they all be used, and they probably do this for a good reason. Inspectors should be wary of place nail here notices that are nowhere near any nails, like we just discussed. Lack of insulation. Hatches in many houses, especially older ones, are not likely to be weather stripped or insulated. An uninsulated attic hatch allows air from the attic to flow freely into the home, which may cause the heating or cooling system to run overtime. An attic hatch cover box can be installed to increase energy savings. Loose mounting bolts. This condition is more often caused by age rather than a defective installation, although improper installation will hasten the loosening process. Attic pull-down ladders that are cut too short or cut too long. Um, let's see. And then attic feet that are not cut to the slope of the attic floor. When the bottom of the rail of the stair rail is just hitting on that bottom corner, and then that causes the ladder to be very unstable and wobbly. Um, attic pull down stairs that compromise the fire barrier when the attic access is installed in the garage. Um, used to it was very common. So there were kind of two basic types of attic pull down stairs. You had ones that were intended for the interior and ones that were intended for the exterior. The ones that were intended for the interior are often not fire rated because you're not in a fire rated area versus your garage ceiling is a fire rated area, and so you should have fire rated attic access pull down. So for a long time our local code inspectors did not call out the interior attic pull down stairs being installed in the garage attic or the garage ceiling. That needed to be fire rated. So that has since changed. That's been about 5 years since our local code inspectors started calling that out. So we are seeing that a lot more often, but your area might be different. If it is fire rated, there should be a sticker when you pull down the stairs. A lot of times it says, that it is a fire rated attic pull down stair material. So um, let's see. Let's see. The closed ladder is covered with debris such as blown insulation or roofing material that's shed during roof work. Inspectors can place a sheet on the floor beneath the ladder to catch whatever debris may fall onto the floor. I would highly recommend. There are so many times where, you know, I'm in my zone. I'm installing, and so usually when I'm doing an inspection, I wear contacts, and then I have sunglasses or safety glasses on. I used to not wear safety glasses, but then you go to lift up an attic hatch or pull down an attic pull down stairs, and you get a face full of whatever was on those stairs. Sometimes that can be mouse feces, it can be spider stuff, it can be a whole, insulation, and then you get a whole face full of that stuff. So when I pull down attic stairs, I always stand off to the side now and pull them down. I would not recommend pulling down right in front of you. Same thing goes when you have an attic hatch. I try to not be directly underneath the attic hatch. I try to keep my head off to the side and then push up and over because anything that is on or around that attic hatch, you'll get a face full of that stuff, and it's nasty. Especially in older existing homes. Um, Cracked steps, you'll see that a lot, especially if the attic stairs were not installed correctly. They're overextending, or the feet are not cut to the slope of the floor. Just like with you, the safety conditions of your ladder, you always want to check your ladder before going up. Um, I'm gonna I'm gonna eat some crow here. So as you know, as diligent as I try to be, I this one time I did not check my ladder, and I guess, my ladder is a little giant, so it has those little feet on the bottom. Well, as I'm pulling that ladder and it's rolling on those feet, well, as I pull it and lift it up, over time, the rubber foot on the bottom of that, I've rubbed that rubber foot off. And it worked fine for me until I put my ladder up on a sloped surface on a sloped driveway. Put my ladder up, and then as I got up on the ladder, my that rubber foot was not in contact. Instead, it was the hard plastic that was in contact with the concrete, and the ladder slipped out from underneath me. Luckily, I was okay. But my pride was hurt, and I definitely, even as a multi-inspector firm owner, I still just get in that mode myself where I just kind of, it's easy to overlook that safety or say, oh, I'll check it next time or whatever. So the same thing goes with attic stairs. When you're pulling down those stairs, do not just pull them down and then run right up. You want to make sure your hinges are in good shape. You want to make sure that the mounting brackets for the hinge brackets on the side, especially if they didn't install the correct mounting hardware, over time those springs will pull in those hinges. And if you step on that, especially me, I'm a big guy. And so, if the homeowner is a little old lady who weighs a quarter of what I weigh, and she can go up those stairs just fine and not have a problem. But the second that I put my foot on that thing, and then those brackets, pull in, or the step, is partially cracked and then it cracks all the way through. So just make sure you're following your safety protocols. You're always checking your ladder before you step on it and making sure that it is safe and good to use. Um, and then on occasion, you're going to come across what are called sliding pull down ladders. Those are a lot of times you're going to find those in really confined spaces um, whereas they couldn't cut out the full structure to be able to put in standard attic pull down stairs. You just have um, these slide down pull down ladders. I've honestly I've only come across them I think 2 or 3 times in my career, and I've done over 6,000 inspections for 10 years. So that just tells you how uncommon they are, but you will come across them on occasion. So when you're unfamiliar with a ladder system, make sure you pull it down, you check it, you're doing all your safety checks. If you're unfamiliar or don't feel comfortable in it, don't use it. Use your own ladder. Do whatever you need to do to make sure that you go home that night and you are not, incurring any hospital bills, and you're not incurring any damage bills from the homeowner if you incorrectly use the ladder system. Um, and then just real quick, here's a little code reference for the attic access. So if you look on now this is a older code reference, but the number should still be the same. But this is from the 2006 IRC. R807.1 attic access. Buildings with combustible ceiling or roof construction shall have an attic access opening to attic areas that exceed 30 square feet and have a vertical height of 30 inches or more. The rough framed opening shall not be less than 22 inches by 30 inches and shall be located in a hallway or readily accessible location. A 30-inch minimum unobstructed headroom in the attic space shall be provided at some point above the attic access opening. Um, So again, you know, uh, I'll tell you. So there was new construction house, 3-story, $1.5 million home. The only attic access opening was in it was like a 2-story garage with was just an attic access, and it was above the garage door opener. So none of that met that code reference. And so obviously we called that out. I have no idea what the fix was or what the homeowner required the builder to do. It was a custom build, and they didn't. Nobody really paid attention. Interestingly enough, both HVAC systems are in that attic. Well, there's a separate attic access that was accessible, but the second HVAC unit was only accessible from that inaccessible hatch. So I'm not sure what they did because there was no way to get from one attic access to the other. So I'm sure they had to cut a new opening and maybe had to rebuild and reconfigure the HVAC in the attic space in that garage. So again, so even if just because it's new construction doesn't mean it's right. Attic rulers and thickness. All right, so a professional installer will attach vertical rulers or attic rulers to the joists of the attic prior to installing blown-in insulation. The installer should provide a signed and dated statement describing the insulation installed, its thickness, the coverage area, its R value, and the number of bags installed. This informational notice located in the attic is referred to as the attic card. Insulation manufacturers provide similar charts on their product bags. The chart states the minimum number of bags that need to be installed per 1,000 square feet of area in order to obtain a specific R value. Building inspectors typically check the insulation's depth to verify compliance with local codes. Making sure the appropriate amount of insulation is installed requires a bag count or a comparison with the recommendations on the attic card. Excuse me. If the attic has blown-in insulation, check the back corners in hard to see and hard to access areas. It is common for these areas to have insulation installed that is too thin. Insulation should be evenly distributed throughout the attic with the correct density and depth. Additionally, baffles should be installed to prevent blocking the airflow from the attic vents, particularly at the eaves. Um, the insulation should be blown all the way to the top plate of the exterior wall. The recessed lights should be properly filled in and covered. Insulated contact rated fixtures. Only IC rated recessed lights should be installed because they are airtight and could be covered with insulation. Check underneath any pieces of plywood or platforms in the attic. Those areas need to be insulated. If mechanical equipment or storage areas are located in the attic, the flooring or platform decking should be elevated to allow full height or thickness of the insulation to be installed. Check around ductwork, wires, and plumbing. Um, this is, again, I had a new construction house. One of my inspectors, it was one of those had a truss framing in the attic. Very difficult to get through all of the attic space. And he didn't go through all the attic space because it was so hard to get through. But he did not shine his flashlight in from where he was standing in the attic. He did not shine every possible square inch of that attic, and because it was so hard to get into the very back corner of that attic, the even the insulation installer didn't go back there. So turns out the master bedroom ceiling was not insulated. So we got a call on that one. Luckily, it was new construction, so the builder took care of insulating that back, but we did reimburse the client for their inspection fee because that was a clear miss on our part. So again, just, even if you don't walk the whole attic or, go through the attic or disturb insulation, you are still responsible to, from the location, the most accessible location you can be in the attic, you still have to look at every possible square inch using uh, your, your whatever, what do they call it? I can't remember how you rate, flashlights, but I have a 1500 something flashlight. But anyway, that's what I use in a check. You just got to pay. You got to be very methodical, and just, scan. Thank you, lumens. Appreciate you, Scott. You have a 1500 lumen flashlight, and you just every possible square inch. And because, if it's hard for you to get to, that means it was hard for the contractor to get to. That is a theme that you will find throughout our industry. That if it's hard to get to, if it's hard for us to get to, that means it's hard for the contractor to get to. And that's a lot of times where you're going to find the most defects is in those hard to reach places. Um, the so do that. Another location to keep an eye on is, and not that you're required to do thermal imaging, and we're not going to hit on any thermal imaging here, but thermal imaging is how I found this one section. So when you have a trade ceiling, or what do you call it? When it's not necessarily, it's not straight up and down as an angle, but it's at an angle like this. Anyway, so on an exterior wall, that back side of that tray, because it was so close to the eave, even the insulation installer didn't blow insulation down in that part. So the only way, because that was not accessible, I would have been well within my SOP. Coffered. Thank you, Joe. Would have been well within my SOP to have missed, that missing insulation, but I did use a thermal imaging camera on that house, and I was able to see that angle was not insulated in there, so I was able to call that out. But again, if it's hard for you to get to, it's hard for the installer to get to, and so it's very do your due diligence and try, use the tools that you have to try to identify, missing insulation in those areas. Um, Man, Pedro, those are huge flashlights. I've never seen a 5,000, but that's got to be one of those outside spotlight ones I would see advertised all the time on TikTok and Instagram and stuff, right? Costco. All right, right on. All right, so let's see. Let's go to the next. Oh, one other thing to keep in mind is that sometimes if you come across an insulation installer that maybe doesn't have the best reputation, if you are relying on those attic rulers, on those insulation rulers that are in the attic, to dictate the depth of the insulation, you need to, it's if you can access them, I always try to, push back the insulation and make sure that that ruler is not bent at the bottom. So you'll see an installer who wants to save a little bit of money, and so they will bend the attic ruler at the end by an inch or two, and so they can put a little bit less insulation in there so they can use it on the next job. So I would just, if you're going to use a ruler and measure insulation, use your own ruler. Don't rely on the attic rulers. So just keep that in mind too if you're going to call those things out. Attic knee wall ventilation. So knee walls are vertical walls with an attic space directly behind them. You'll typically find them in houses with finished attic spaces and dormer windows, as with 1.5-story houses. There are a couple ways that you may see a knee wall insulated. The most important areas and most overlooked areas to insulate are the open joist ends below the knee wall. The open joist ends below a knee wall should be plugged or stuffed with squares of cardboard, metal flashing or rigid insulation, cellulose insulation blown at high density, or bat insulation stuffed into plastic bags. The plugs should be sealed to the joist using caulk, sealant, or spray foam. The knee wall and attic floor in the attic space behind the knee wall should be insulated. Sometimes string, wire, or cardboard is used to hold the insulation in place at the back side of the knee wall. Another way to insulate this area is to seal and insulate the rafter spaces along the sloping ceiling of the knee wall attic space. The rafters should have proper insulation and ventilation as required. One advantage of this approach is that after properly insulating, any ductwork that was in that small space is now inside a conditioned space. Um, yeah, let's see. Let me see if I can annotate. Yeah, this guy. So this area is oftentimes they will use bat insulation, where this is probably foam board insulation that's kind of what it looks like. So a lot of times they'll use bat insulation on the back of these knee walls, and those, it's a tight space, so maybe it was hard to secure or whatever. But a lot of times you'll find that this bat insulation, if it is bat insulation, has fallen or come loose, or now there's a gap at the top, just because it was so difficult to try to secure in there that they just kind of threw it up there and out of sight, out of mind, and until you're getting in those nooks and crannies with your flashlight and able to see how it's fallen off. So just keep an eye on those areas. Check the exterior. So, an exterior wall of a building should be properly sealed, protected from moisture, and insulated adequately to increase comfort, reduce noise, and save on energy costs. Exterior walls are one of the most complex systems in a building. A drainage plane in a wall system makes an easy pathway for water to drain away from the house. Rain leaks cause a lot of problems for walls. Water penetration into a wall can be the result of improper installation of the siding, poor flashing installation, bad weather stripping, poor caulking around joints at the building exterior, and wind-driven rain into and through the exterior siding material. A drainage plane in the wall assembly protects against water intrusion. An effective wall has all of the following characteristics. It is airtight. All air leaks should be sealed in the wall during construction before the insulation is installed in it. It controls moisture. An exterior rain drainage system, an air barrier, and a vapor diffusion retarder should be installed on the wall on the correct side of the wall, depending on your climate. And three, it has complete insulation coverage. The wall framing should provide enough room for complete maximum insulation coverage and reduce thermal bridging with no open gaps or compressed insulation and continuous insulated sheeting. The benefits of air sealing. Air sealing reduces heat flow from air movement or convection. Air sealing prevents water vapor in the air from entering the wall assembly. In a 100 square foot wall, 1 cup of water can diffuse through the drywall without a vapor diffusion retarder in a single year. 50 cups can enter through a half-inch round hole. Air sealing is 10 to 100 times as important as installing a vapor diffusion retarder. Houses in all climates require the following to control moisture. A polyethylene sheet should cover the exposed dirt in houses with crawl space, often called a vapor barrier. The grading around the house should slope away from the foundation. A continuous vapor diffusion retarder with a perm rating of less than 1 should be installed. And a termite shield, sill gasket, or other vapor impermeable membrane on the top of the foundation wall should be installed to prevent moisture from wicking into the wood framing components via capillary action. So I would say on so I'm just referring to new construction, not only it's very common on existing construction for sure, but even on new construction, our local code inspectors do not call out unsealed penetrations on the exteriors of our houses. So I do a lot of phase inspections, but so just sticking with the actual home inspection portion of it, but being able to use my phase inspection training and the stuff that I see going on behind the wall cladding, and then being able to use that information and use that in a home inspection where I can see where say for instance you have vinyl siding and you have a hose bib penetration, or you have a water line penetration for a hose bib coming through the vinyl siding. So a lot of times that hole in the vinyl siding that they cut in, and even if they put up the vinyl siding blocking and make it look nice and pretty, a lot of times, especially if they're still using house wrap versus zip board, and we'll go over zip board here in a minute, but if they're using house wrap, and I always try to look because, again, our new construction is kind of rough. D.R. Horton, those types of houses, they don't really, nobody checks the siding penetrations on those houses. So a lot of times where that hose bib's coming through, you can actually see the house wrap fibers, and where they blew the hole through the wall from the inside. They basically cut that hole or used a drill and cut through the house wrap, and then they don't seal around it. And you can tell that because you could see the house wrap fibers that are just hanging out there right next to the water pipe. So that's how I tell on on a new construction house or an existing house. And a lot of and if it's like that there, then it's most like that on all the rest of the penetrations. Your electrical penetrations are probably the same. Your plumbing penetrations are the same. Your gas line penetrations are probably the same. So look for those indicators where those penetrations were not sealed after the hole was made, and recommend those to be sealed up in order to make sure that that the air sealing has been completed by the contractor. So. Um, Oh, and then getting back to the zip board or the zip sheathing. So, you know, the zip sheathing. So you have you have two different kinds of systems now that are used for your weather resistant barrier on the outside, right? You still have your classic house wrap, and then you have the new zip board style. And a lot of times, the builder, the contractor, they just buy a ton, just buy a pallet of the ceiling tape, and but they don't buy the flex tape, the stuff that actually was made to stretch and flex around penetrations or your window sills and that kind of stuff. They will just use that joint tape or that ceiling tape, and they will modify it, around there. So, if you read the installation instructions of zip tape or the zip tape, it has to be installed in a very specific pattern with a very, always from the bottom up so that you create a shingle-like pattern so that it directs water away from the wall instead of into the wall. And so when you see these penetrations without siding on them, a lot of times they just take that tape and they take 4 or 5 pieces and they just try to like force it around a little bit. And then so there's what are called bird mouths, and then there's gaps and all that kind of stuff. So what we're seeing a lot of in my area is that when so we have like you have the D.R. Horton, Roush Coleman, those classic large subdivision style builders, right? Who are doing, several hundred houses in a subdivision. Well, there's contractors out there or builders out there that are now taking that model, that that type of construction model, and they're applying it to, $500,000 houses and even $2 million houses. So they're using the same techniques and the same contractors that are building these small, huge subdivisions, and they're now using it to build these multi-million-dollar houses. And so, what we're seeing a lot of in my area is where we're having a lot of water intrusion, because they're not sealing correctly. Nobody told these guys to read the installation instructions. They're not taking any training classes or anything like that. They're just basically saying they're pulling people off the street and they're saying, "Hey, go put this up, install it," and they're not really given any direction. They're saying as long as the tape's up there, it's good. Well, it's not, because water gets in behind the siding. It's going down. It's getting to that really poorly installed flashing tape that is around your penetrations, your windows, your doors, and then it's getting in, and then it's getting into the interior of the walls. And so there's a picture at the end of this of a multi-million-dollar house where there was, I think, I don't know, 50 or 60 windows in this house, and over half of the windows leaked every time it rained. And so, we had to, they basically took the siding off and they reflashed, and over time, because I made them, we made them do it 3 or 4 times. It wasn't up to me to just prescribe the repair. I just told them what was wrong, and the homeowner was okay with the repair, but they ended up adding 3 or 4 layers of flashing tape around each window to stop the water from coming in. So that was on them, but but for whatever reason, I think because it's being so poorly installed, and it's not like House wrap is, I think, more forgiving because you have a huge sheet of WRB, and that is shedding water away. Even if you have penetrations that are not air sealed, you're less likely to have a problem than if you use zip tape flashing, where there's a joint every, what's it, 4 by 8 foot or 6 foot. What's a standard sheet of plywood? I can't even remember. I think it's 4 by 6, right? Anyway, so every one of those joints is now a penetration location and is either not air sealed or not weather sealed. And 4 by 8. Thanks, guys. Um, I got so much going on in my head. I can't. I'm not pulling up basic facts. Anyway, so now on zip tape, every joint is now a potential, air infiltration or water infiltration point, which is why we're getting so much. I'm getting so many calls for water damage on new construction houses on these 500 to 1 million, $2 million houses because of this. Everybody's using zip tape instead of house wrap now, and I just think it's so much less forgiving than house wrap. So just keep an eye on those things. Okay. Oh, let's see. Am I not advancing? Here we go. All right, check the floors. There should be access hole through the perimeter wall of the crawl space. It should be at least 16 by 24 inches. If the access is through the floor, then the minimum dimension should be 18 by 24. Um, Look at the underside of any floor that is located over an unheated space, such as a crawl space, basement, or garage. Check and measure the insulation that is installed there. It will likely be fiberglass batt insulation. The insulation may be identified with its R value printed on it. If it's not, multiply the fiberglass batt thickness by 3.2 to figure out its R value. If the insulation is foam board or sprayed foam application and you can't find any labeling, you can multiply its thickness in inches by 5 to get a good estimate of its R value. If there is a floor over a crawl space, check for the presence of insulation installed underneath the floor. Also check to see whether the crawl space is ventilated. You may discover that the floor is not insulated and the crawl space is not ventilated, but the perimeter walls are insulated. When bats or rolls of insulation are installed on the underside of a floor above an unheated crawl space or basement, insulation should be 1. Fitted between the beams or joists. 2. Pushed up against the floor overhead as securely and as snugly as possible. 3. Installed without compressing it. 4. Held in place with netting or snap-in wire holders. 5. Cut off and stuffed into tight spaces by hand. 6. Cut and fitted around cross bracing between floor joists and any obstructions. 6. Installed against the perimeter band rim joist that rests upon the sill plate. And 7. Installed on all ducts and pipes passing through the unheated space. Reflective systems are installed in a similar way to batt insulation. It is important to install reflective insulation properly for it to be effective. Sometimes reflective insulation will have flanges stapled to the framing members. This conductive material must not come into contact with any electrical current. You may find spray foam insulation at a floor system. The spray can do an excellent job of insulating and filling the spaces around electrical wires, pipes, and other obstructions. In a non-ventilated crawl space, you may see fiberglass blanket insulation installed on the perimeter walls attached to furring strips. You may also see insulation fastened to the sill plate and draped down the perimeter wall of the crawl space. The insulation may continue over the crawl space floor for a couple of feet on top of the required ground vapor diffusion retarder. Foam insulation installed on the walls of a non-ventilated crawlspace may be bonded to the wall using adhesive. If any insulation is exposed, consider checking the local fire codes and the flame spreading ratings of the insulation. If your client's home is in an area prone to termite infestation, be sure you communicate to your client about the inspection restrictions caused by the insulation. Condensation and crossover duct installation or insulation. If you're going to enter the attic space, be careful not to step on and compress the ductwork that may be hidden under your feet by blown-in insulation. Sometimes blown-in insulation will be layered over ductwork in the attic space, and it will be hard to see the ductwork. Robert, we'll get to your question in a minute. The ductwork of the HVAC system in a house may be checked by the inspector. If the ducts run through unconditioned spaces in the house, such as crawl space or an attic, then the ductwork should be insulated. The ductwork should not leak air. Leaking joints should be repaired with mechanical fasteners and then sealed with water-soluble mastic and embedded fiber mesh. Gray cloth duct tape should never be used for this purpose. It degrades, cracks, and loses its integrity and bond with age. If the joint is going to be opened up in the future for maintenance or other reasons, then aluminum foil tape may be used. The ductwork should be wrapped with insulation that has a minimum R value of 6, with a vapor diffusion retarder facing on the outer exterior side. The insulation should not be compressed. It should be overlapped and sealed with fiberglass tape where sections of the insulation meet. The insulation should not be torn or damaged. The vapor diffusion retarder should not be cut, torn, or damaged. The ductwork should not be compressed or damaged. Um, all right, we're going to highlight this here real quick. Let me see what Robert said. Should you call out craft paper on insulation that faces the cold side of uninsulated crawl space? Um, Craft paper on on insulation that faces the cold side. So you're talking about the craft paper facing to the outside of the crawl space or to the inside of the crawl space, Robert? Here, while he answers that, I'm gonna hit a comment real quick. So condensation and crossover duct insulation. So facing downward, is it upside down? Yes, yes. The paper should always be on the warm side of, and there's a really good picture I have at the end of this inspect or at the end of this class that shows you why that's important. So yes, we'll talk about that here in a second or at the very end. So thank you, Robert. Yeah, we'll address that. So in this diagram here. I did again, this was probably, and this was a house, I think it was probably built, what, early 2000s probably. So the floor was not insulated, the crawl space walls were not insulated. The ductwork was insulated until right here. So the insulation came up and then it stopped. The insulation stopped on the ductwork about right where this arrow is, where you can start to see these condensation water drops. But again, the floor was not insulated. So um, the client or the homeowner that was living in the home, they did not use, one is that they they had no idea how to open and close their crawl space vents, right? Their vapor barrier or their vapor retarder on the crawl space floor was not consistent. There was gaps all over the place. So we had really high humidity in that crawl space, and then they didn't open their vents during the summertime. And in Arkansas, that's super important when you open your vents in the summertime, because otherwise that humid air and you know and our vapor retarders are not installed correctly here. They don't overlap, they don't tape any of that stuff. They basically just put them down and they kind of butt them up together, and so it's really easy to move them and then have exposed dirt. So the client though, or the seller of the house, condensation was building up on the register that was going through the floor so much that it was rotting out the subfloor on all sides. So I think there was probably because only half of the house was a crawl space because it was on a hill. So and the section or the side of the house that was on crawl space was primarily the master bedroom or the primary bedroom. And so I think we had six register penetrations through the floor, and almost all of them had mold or organic growth, and they were all rotting out because so much condensation was building up. The wood was soaking it in, and then as that happened year over year over year over year, it basically was dry rotting out the floor, and then the mold was, of course, eating the subfloor. So they were very disappointed to find that out. Um, And so, but that just shows you how important the insulation is because you have this super cold air in the summertime going through the ductwork, gets to this uninsulated portion. The ductwork reached its dew point, the moisture in the air condensed, and then it soaked into the subfloor. So pay special attention to those floor penetrations on the unconditioned spaces that are not insulated, and make sure that there's no damage there. So. All the diagrams, you can get those from InterNACHI. InterNACHI has a diagram library, and all these diagrams are in the diagram library on the InterNACHI website. All right. Um, Types of insulation, I'm not gonna read through all this. You can kind of get an idea of generally what types of insulation there is. Um, what the form of the insulation is, what type of insulation it is, where you use it, how it's installed, and the advantages of using it. Um, we'll just head to the next one. Roof insulation and ventilation. So, roof system ventilation and insulation are important for a number of reasons, including condensation control, temperature or heat control, energy efficiency, and the prevention of chronic ice dam formation. Ventilation of attic areas is intended to prevent the accumulation of moisture vapor in the attic roof space and to dry low levels of condensation that may form on the underside of a roof deck. Ventilation is also intended to reduce the temperature of roof deck during hot periods to improve shingle durability. Reducing attic temperature through ventilation and insulation also improves energy efficiency during hot periods. And in the case of ice dams, elevated attic and roof temperatures during the winter can cause snow on the roof to melt. Insulation and roof ventilation help to keep the roof's exterior surface cold and minimize the development of melted water and consequently ice dams. Ventilating roofs in hot and humid conditions may add rather than remove moisture from attics and enclosed roof spaces. However, not ventilating a roof may void the manufacturer's warranty and slightly decrease the life expectancy of asphalt shingles due to the increased temperature of the roof surface. In colder climates, roof ventilation serves to remove humidity and condensation from the roof attic space and helps to prevent chronic formation of ice dams at the eaves. Tile and concrete Tile, concrete, and metal roofing materials are not similarly affected. It is possible to have an unvented attic space, but such a choice may require designing the attic roof space as a conditioned space, similar to that required when creating a habitable space in an attic. There are several sources that provide detailed information for designing an unvented attic. Traditional attic ventilation remains a cost-effective, though imperfect solution for moisture control. Wood framed. Oh yeah. Well, here I'll let. Yeah, okay. For vented wood-framed pitched roof systems, the primary concern is the potential for moisture to build up at the sloped underside of the roof deck during cold weather. The underside of the roof deck is the condensing plane. Where vents are installed at the eaves, the insulation should not block the vents or free flow of air. Where eave or cornice vents are installed, insulation must not block the free flow of air. There should be a minimum of 1 inch space provided between the insulation and the roof deck sheathing and at the location of the vent. This clearance can be provided by a rafter vent component, often referred to as a baffle. The ridge vent itself may have exterior or external baffles and a weather filter, like a mesh material, integrated into the vent's design to help prevent the entrance of rain or snow through the openings of the ridge vent component. To completely cover an attic floor with insulation out to the eaves, the installation of rafter vents, also known as insulation baffles, is needed. Complete coverage of the attic floor, along with sealing any air leaks, will ensure the homeowner gets the best performance from the insulation. Rafter vents ensure that the soffit vents are clear and there is a channel for outside air to move into the attic at the soffits and out through the gable or ridge vent. You can see that in this diagram over here, and then here's a baffle, and then this is a vaulted ceiling with an airspace that allows air to still flow underneath the shingles to keep the manufacturer's warranty on them. To install the rafter vents, a contractor can staple them directly to the roof decking. Rafter vents come in 4-foot lengths and 14.5 and 22.5-inch widths for different rafter spacing. When the rafter vents or baffles are in place properly, the bats or blankets or blown insulation can be installed right out to the very edge of the attic floor. Blown insulation may require an additional set of rafter vents or blocking material to prevent the insulation from being blown into the soffit. A piece of rigid foam board placed on the outer edge of the top plate works very well for this purpose. Lastly, code requires ventilation to be provided for each enclosed attic space and enclosed rafter space that forms where ceilings are installed at the bottom of the roof rafter boards. Each separate rafter space must be ventilated. The ventilation opening should be a minimum of 1/8 inch and a maximum of 1/4 inch and protected with corrosion resistant wire mesh. Something that you'll see often is so in this picture of the baffle on the bottom right corner is that an insulation installer, especially if they're using blown-in insulation, if they're not careful, a lot of times they'll blow insulation and they will block the baffle from ventilation. So, doing new construction insulation or basically any house that has baffles installed, I would definitely, if you can see the baffle, make sure that there is not insulation that is blocking that airspace that's coming through. Um, Yeah, so I did an inspection earlier this week. What's today? No, late last week. Um, beautiful, beautiful home, very expensive, and they used the house was built right when spray foam insulation and vaulted ceilings were at their height of, well, were at the beginnings of their installation when using spray foam in a vaulted ceiling. And so uh, they luckily, I think the homeowner did not use that that part of the house that had the um, uh, they okay, so they they spray foamed the roof decking, right? And then and it was a really kind of a small attic space, but then they terminated the bathroom vent up into that attic space. And so there was no airflow. So basically everything below that spray foam is now supposed to be considered conditioned air, right? So you now, through all the building science, through the trial and error that we've gone through, with this new installation, new building practice, new installation practice. Now we know that we need to circulate that air because if that air becomes moisture laden, it cannot it cannot pass through the spray foam insulation. There was no roof ventilation there because they spray foamed the roof decking. So now you're running into the possibility of the bottom of that insulation now being the dew point location. So that hot, humid air that is being pumped in there from the bathroom collects on the spray foam, and once it gets there becomes so much moisture there, then it starts to basically rain inside that attic. So uh, you know, so there was evidence of moisture drips on because now you can see, because there's no insulation on the ceiling, there's only insulation on the roof decking. So we were able to see where moisture had dripped onto the ceiling framing. So that was a really good indicator that obviously we do not have the right air movement in there to move that moisture-laden air out of that unconditioned, or that, well, technically it was unconditioned space. So just keep an eye on that stuff. Um, let's see here. All right, unvented roof systems attic assembly. So expanding on what we were just talking about, spray foam, open and closed cell, and fiberglass insulation can perform successfully at unvented roof systems or unvented attic assemblies when air tightness is provided and humidity is controlled. Here's one other, before I get into the rest of this dialogue. So I was called out to do an investigation on a house. Um, the homeowner had a two-story cabin. They added a three-story addition onto the side. So they dug out the earth, basically created like a walkout basement. And then you had the main floor, which was attached to their original main floor, and then a second floor. And then the entire new assembly, they put a new metal roof over the top of it. So, um, and this was kind of out in the country, not a lot of building science contractors, right? Basically, the contractors were asked to do something, they did it, but they did not know the building science behind what they were doing. So the homeowner was using it kind of as a vacation home until they permanently retired, and then they were going to live there full time. But so they were gone for 3 weeks out of the month. And so they would come for a week and then they would be gone for 3 weeks. Well, every time they would come home, they would walk into their home and all their electronics were ruined and it looked like it had rained inside of their home. So what they ended up doing is when they built that three-story addition, they put the new metal roof over the top of the original home in the new addition. They did not change or adjust any of the ventilation. So basically, when they put the new roof on, they basically put a hat on top of their house, and any moisture that was produced inside of the house, either from just RH, relative humidity, when it had rained inside, or whether they were cooking inside, or whatever they were doing, or showering, or whatever, that moisture had nowhere to go. So it was rising up to the roof ceiling, it was condensing on that roof plane, and it basically rained inside of their home. So they lost, I think they went through three TVs, they went through multiple different kinds of electronics, that type of stuff. So, ventilation, insulation is super important into, the moisture control inside of a home. So, um, all right, so I'll get off my high horse on that one. So for unvented roof systems, the condensing plane is the underside of the air impermeable foam. When they're properly installed, condensation should not exist because the temperature of the interior face of the foam should be about the same as the interior air temperature. But when you don't have that rotation of air, that moisture-laden air gets up into that space that does not rotate it the air out, comes into that condensing plane, and then drips down. To control air tightness, an air barrier system must be installed in the roof insulation assembly. An air impermeable layer may be installed on the inside of the air permeable insulation, such as fiberglass or cellulose, to control both air and moisture movement. For roofs sealed with spray foam insulation, air leakage is effectively stopped. Failure will be likely via accidental or unintended airflows at unvented wood framed pitched roof systems, such as around roof penetrations, including plumbing vents. Unvented attic assemblies should meet the following conditions. The unvented attic space must be completely contained within the building's thermal envelope. Interior vapor retarders must not be installed on the ceiling or the attic floor of the unvented attic assembly. At wood shingle shake roofs, a vented airspace of 1/4 inch should separate the shingle shakes from the roofing underlayment above the roof deck. An air impermeable insulation can be applied in direct contact with the underside of the roof deck. For climate zones 5, 6, 7, and 8, air impermeable insulation must have a vapor retarder in direct contact with the underside of the insulation. As long as air tightness is provided and humidity during the winter is controlled, unvented roof systems can perform successfully. Inspecting roof ventilation in 10 steps. Step 1, measure the area to be ventilated in square feet. Step 2, determine if there is a vapor barrier installed on the warm and winter side of the ceiling. Step 3, check the location of the vents. Step 4, check the type of vents. Remember to inform your client that turbine vents and electrically powered fan vents need to be inspected, tested, and maintained annually. Step 5, determine if the enclosed attic spaces and enclosed rafter spaces formed by the ceiling finish applied directly to the bottom of the rafter boards have cross ventilation for each separate space. Attics and enclosed rafter spaces must have cross ventilation. Step 6, measure the net free area of the vents. Little note about step 6, the net free area of the vents. So something I call out pretty consistently on new construction, especially, is that you go up into an attic space and you see the attic, like the high roof ventilation, where there'd be box vents, turbines, even the ridge vents, and you need to make sure that that the roof decking has been appropriately cut out so that the prescribed net-free area of the vent is allowing the intended airspace, or I'm sorry, is allowing the intended airflow through the vent. So oftentimes you'll see where it's only half of the vent, or the vent is offset. Maybe the hole is the right size, but they offset the vent. All of those things, because the attic was designed specifically for those many vents with that amount of net-free space, net-free ventilation area. If that is reduced at all, then you are reducing your ventilation, which could uh, slow the convection motion of the air to properly get out of the attic. So if now you're left with superheated attic air in the attic space, which can increase your utility costs, decrease the life expectancy of your shingles, um, um, yeah, those two things. Uh, Step 7, determine whether the ventilation openings are protected against rain or snow. They should measure a minimum of an eighth inch and maximum of a quarter inch and be protected with corrosion resistant wire and mesh. There are times where I have seen ridge vents, they used to be super popular, and now they're starting to go away, and box vents and turbines are starting to get reintroduced because depending on which way the house is facing, if you have a ridge vent and you get a blowing, driving rain, and that rain, if you don't have the correct mesh or the screening on those ridge vents or whatever, you can get blowing rain, blowing snow, and all that stuff, which can then come into the attic space. Step 8, calculate the required roof ventilation. If a vapor barrier is installed, multiply the area by 1 in 300. If no vapor barrier is installed, the vents are installed only in the lower portion of the space to be vented below 3 feet of the vertical height of the space, then multiply the area by 1 in 1 or by 1 in 150, or if 50% to 80% of the vents are in the upper portion of the space to be ventilated and the balance of the ventilation is provided by the E vents, multiply the area by 1 to 300. Again, very agreed. Jeff, very technically exhaustive here, but uh, just trying to, what we're trying to get at is knowing this information will allow you to identify defects. Now, you don't necessarily, we're not expecting you to call this stuff out and call out, the roof vents or don't meet requirements and that type of stuff. But if the roof vents are blocked and you have a 5-year-old roof that looks like a 30-year-old roof, then you know it might be because the ventilation is not correct. So, you're not required to prescribe the repair or completely identify the defect, but it helps you as an inspector to be able to identify defects that will help your client save money, save costs, save energy, all those things. So let's keep going on the ice dams real quick, and um, then we'll get done with this portion. So, an ice dam is caused by the warming of attic space, and while attic ventilation and insulation contribute to the prevention of ice dams by keeping attics cold, they can be overpowered by other attic warming effects, such as air leakage from the house into the attic through ceiling bypasses, chases, open gaps, and uninsulated ducts installed in the attic. If significant conditioned air escapes into the attic ventilation may not be capable of preventing the warming of the roof decking and the subsequent formation of ice dams. Therefore, sealing air leaks between the house and the vented attic is essential for making attic ventilation work. Air leakage from the interior into the attic also introduces moisture. If a significant amount of interior air leaks into the attic, the ventilation in the attic may not be sufficient to prevent moisture and condensation problems. For enhanced protection against formation of ice dams, the table provides recommended insulation levels and vent area ratios as a function of the venting layout. These recommendations should be found in areas with a ground snow load greater than 30 pounds per square foot and in other areas where ice dams are a concern. The ventilation recommendations in the table can be used in addition to eave ice dam flashing to create multiple lines of defense. Also, the arrangement of vent areas must balance the high outlet with the low inlet vent openings. Ooh, all right. A common problem with many roof designs can be found at the eaves. There is often very little space for insulation of the required thickness to be installed at the eaves without blocking the soffit vents. Often the insulation is compressed in that area in order to fit into the tight space, which diminishes its R value. To correct the situation, some builders install a truss roof with a raised heel or oversized cantilever. This type of truss has an elevated overhang that uses a combination of soffit and eave vents with baffles and soffit dams installed at the eaves. This type of truss provides plenty of room for insulation at the wall-to-roof intersection, as well as additional window shading. In stick-built roofs, some builders install an additional top plate across the top of the ceiling joists at the eave to raise the roof height. This additional top plate raises the roof height, prevents compression of the insulation, and allows room for ventilation. Most building code require roof vents to expel moisture that could cause insulation or other building materials to deteriorate during the winter. In summer, ventilation may reduce the roof temperature and lengthen its service life. A combination of continuous ridge vents along the peak of the roof and continuous soffit vents at the eaves provides the most effective ventilation. Cap vents and gable vents can supplement a roof design that has an insufficient ridge vent area. Turbine vents can also be used, but they need annual inspection and maintenance. Electrically powered roof fans are not ideal because they typically use more energy than they save. Powered roof fans can also cause other problems, such as sucking conditioned air from the house's interior through leakage pathways in the ceiling, pulling airborne pollutants from the crawl space into the house's interior, and causing exhaust gases from fireplaces and combustion appliances to enter the home. Researchers are still investigating whether attic ventilation is good for all climates. Until the research results are available and accepted, installation practices for attic ventilation should follow local code requirements. Finished basement walls. Finished basement walls are exposed to many different things that come from all directions. The finished basement wall is exposed to different temperatures, moisture levels, water vapor movement, heat, cold, cool concrete, warm interior air, etc. And they all relate to the biggest concern with basement finished walls: moisture, specifically exterior moisture. The approaches for insulating and finishing basement spaces vary depending on whether you're dealing with new or existing construction and whether a basement is being only insulated but not finished. Exterior insulation that uses foam insulation panels on the outside of the foundation wall is commonly installed for new construction and is difficult to evaluate on existing homes. This exterior insulation, or foam panels on the outside of the foundation, provides a moisture-tolerant insulation layer on the outside of the foundation wall. This insulation layer moderates the temperature of the inside wall surface and can also integrate with an exterior water or damp proofing. If this type of insulation is installed, it requires shifting the house structure outward such that the sill plate overlaps. You can see here, this little area, that the overlaps the upper edge of the foundation insulation, protecting the exterior insulation during construction and providing long-term protection for the exposed insulation. If there is foam insulation installed on the outside of the exterior foundation, look for building practices that overlap and protect the insulation. In new construction, above-grade wood frame wall will typically be constructed of 2x6s that overhang the foundation wall. The overhang can be up to 2 inches. Additional rigid insulation can be added that extends over the entire wall assembly. Interior insulation on basement walls. You may find foam insulation installed installed as interior basement insulation. It offers good moisture performance, but also requires being covered with a fire-resistant material such as drywall. Foam is good for insulating a finished basement. A finished basement that is of high quality usually has some type of exterior waterproofing, relative humidity control in the basement, and air sealing. A dry basement is less likely to have problems with wood-destroying organisms. Once the exterior grading and groundwater factors have been addressed, the basement should remain dry and protected by properly installed wall assemblies. The basement The basement's finished walls need to be insulated to minimize cold surfaces. Cold surfaces, such as on the foundation wall, can create water condensation and raise humidity level in the basement. The concrete foundation walls are below grade and are therefore relatively cool to the touch, especially if finished walls are insulated. If the basement air, which tends to be warm and humid, particularly in the summertime, passes through the finished walls and comes into contact with cool foundation walls, condensation may form and cause moisture problems, including damage and mold growth. The rim band joist area, which is the area directly above the foundation wall, is of particular concern because that area tends to stay relatively cool all the time. A finished basement should be insulated around the perimeter of the basement's exterior walls, and the basement ceiling should not be insulated. As a home inspector, you may see the problem where there may be insulation in between the finished basement space, the conditioned space, and the floor above. The finished basement walls should not be insulated with a type of insulation that is sensitive to water. It should be an insulation that is relatively water resistant. This technique, as well as traditional basement finish practices, is not intended to compensate for inadequate waterproofing, foundation drainage, indoor relative humidity control, or air leakage control. If there are problems with water intrusion, drainage, humidity, air, or leakage, then the method of insulating the basement foundation wall will not matter. Insulating a basement on the interior side of the foundation wall is relatively new to residential construction as a best practice. Therefore, this strategy is included here primarily for your consideration. The insulation to use when finishing a basement is rigid foam insulation board. That type of insulation will allow the foundation wall assembly to dry inward, away from the foundation wall, and toward the interior of the finished basement space. The foam insulation should be vapor permeable. The greater the perm, the easier it is for the wall to dry inward. Because the foam insulation needs to be continuous and sealed at the seams, the insulation should be installed behind the wood framed wall. Additional insulation can be installed in the spaces between the studs. Humid air at the basement's interior should be prevented from leaking into the finished basement wall assembly and subsequently condensing. The interior side of the wall assembly should not have large holes in it. The ideal approach uses the gypsum wallboard as an air barrier and requires sealing any penetrations through and leaks around the panels. Air sealing of ceiling penetrations in the basement should also be addressed. Traditional practices, such as the use of warm and winter vapor diffusion retarder on the inside of the finished wall system, have resulted in moisture problems. Low permeability and continuous vapor diffusion retarders, such as polyethylene sheeting and vinyl wallpaper on the interior side of the basement finishes, should be avoided because they will trap moisture vapor barrier moving through the foundation wall. They will also slow the drying process for newly formed foundation. Foam is a fire hazard. Semi-permeable rigid foam insulation and spray foam insulation on the inside of a basement foundation wall is often found during an inspection of a full basement foundation of the full basement foundation of a house. Its use could be a good strategy for moisture-resistant finished basement. However, fire and smoke characteristics of this type of insulation require that it be covered with a fire-resistant layer, such as gypsum wallboard. Sometimes this requirement works fine when the basement is being finished. The requirement of having spray foam insulation be protected by a thermal barrier is found in the 2015 IRC Section 316. In most cases where spray polyurethane foam insulation is installed, the foam should be separated from the interior living space by an approved thermal barrier of at least half-inch gypsum drywall. 23/32 inch wood structural panel, or a material tested to meet acceptable criteria by the National Fire Protection Association. There are a few exceptions to this requirement, including flame spread index ratings. If a basement will only be insulated and not finished, a fire-rated foam panel or similar fire-rated covering needs to be used. Because above-grade portions of the basement wall can dry to the outside, fire-rated insulation on these surfaces may be of an impermeable type. For example, it can have foil facing, but insulating approaches that restrict the drying potential of below-grade portions of the foundation wall toward the inside should be avoided. Here is a lot of indicators that you should look for, when it comes to water, staining, cracks, all the different sources of water and all the indicators that you have high moisture in a crawl space or in a basement. Perimeter insulation on slab on grade. It is important to know something about insulation, moisture, and slab on grade. Foundation construction. Appropriate moisture-resistant site design and foundation installation should be checked during an inspection. In mixed and cold climates, careful attention should be given to the slab edge and foundation's perimeter insulation to avoid thermal bridges, which can cause cold slab surfaces and condensation. The elevation of a slab-on-grade foundation should be a minimum of 8 inches above the exterior finished grade. In areas with heavy rainfall, a clearance of greater than 8 inches or some other rain control measures may be installed, such as back vented cladding and ice and water shield 18 inches up the wall. With a properly mounted slab and functional site grading, surface water should drain away and minimize the moisture load around and beneath the slab. A vapor diffusion retarder of 6 mil poly or other approved vapor diffusion retarder is generally required by standards below any slab intended as a floor or habitable space. The joints should be lapped not less than 6 inches. It should be placed in direct contact with the underside of the concrete slab. The vapor diffusion retarder will prevent moisture vapor from adding to the building's interior moisture load and also serve as a brake to the capillary movement of moisture. Concrete, cracks in the concrete floor. Concrete will crack as a normal outcome of the curing process. Cracking can be worsened if uneven bearing conditions exist under the slab, such as uncompacted fill areas. Excessive water used for the workability of cement tends to produce excessive cracking, which can allow moisture to more readily penetrate the concrete slab, weakening the concrete and leading to differential drying issues and cracking. Excessive cracking can allow additional moisture as well as radon gas to penetrate more easily through the slab. The use of welded wire fabric reinforcement provides a means of controlling the severity of cracking. The use of fiber reinforced concrete may also provide adequate crack control. Concrete control joints may also be used to control random cracking by creating planned lines of weakness in the slab. Shrinkage or curing cracks generally occur in any continuous length of concrete longer than about 12 feet. As with basement foundations and footings, the local building code does not always require horizontal reinforcement of the thickened edge. Footing of a monolithic slab on grade. The same applies to a stem wall and independent slab construction. Some building practices may incorporate a minimum of continuous number 5 rebar located horizontally at the top and the bottom of the thickened edge of a monolithic slab or stem wall. This allows the thickened edge slab or footing to act as a moderately reinforced grade beam to reduce cracking from differential settlement. Concrete and masonry stem walls may be reinforced with horizontal reinforcement bars in a manner similar to that recommended for basement walls. For difficult site soil conditions, expansive soils, or weak soils, other types of concrete slab foundations may be more appropriate, such as mat foundations and post-tension slabs. Insulation at the slab. Building codes allow foundation insulation to be placed on various locations of the perimeter slab-on-grade foundation. The best location for insulation slab-on-grade foundation is on the vertical outside face of the foundation. In this location, thermal bridges are minimized, energy efficiency is maximized, and slab surface temperatures are moderated to prevent the risk of condensation during cold weather. If slab-on-grade insulation is placed in different location on the inside face of the perimeter foundation wall, then there should be a continuous thermal break between the indoor portions of the slab and the exterior. When used, exterior foundation insulation must be protected from the elements at additional expense. One way a builder could reduce costs while installing exterior slab perimeter insulation is to use frost-protected shallow foundation. These foundations are found in northern regions. They are most cost-effective in climates where required frost depths are substantially greater than 12 inches and foundation insulation requirements are more stringent. Frost-protected shallow foundation systems offer a design option that allows for shallower footing depths by raising the frost depth around the building through the use of insulation. Slab finishes and insulation. Like basement wall finishes, finishes on concrete floors of slabs on grade are exposed to a unique environment due to direct ground contact. From a moisture perspective, tile, terrazzo, terrazzo. Stained decorative concrete and other moisture-resistant finishes are ideal for slab-on-grade construction. These materials are resistant to flooding and other sources of moisture damage and are typical in southern, hot, humid climates. In such cases, the primary concerns are limiting indoor humidity, providing a sub-slab vapor diffusion retarder directly below the concrete slab, and providing a capillary break like gravel. Carpet and wood-based floor finishes should not be applied directly to slabs on grade unless the slab or finished surface temperature is raised near room temperature. Moderated floor temperatures that can accommodate moisture-sensitive finishes can be achieved with sub-slab or slab surface insulation as well as perimeter insulation to prevent thermal short circuits in the slab. Where slab temperatures are chilled by cold exterior winter conditions or cooled by ground temperatures during the spring or summer, surface condensation or high humidity may result in mold growth or condensation damage. If a slab shows signs of pre-existing moisture problems such as dampness or condensation, salt deposits, or standing water, that issue should be addressed before moving ahead with finished flooring. The primary cause of moisture problems in crawl spaces include poor site drainage, lack of ground vapor diffusion retarder, improperly installed insulation, and crawl space ventilation during humid summer conditions. Crawl space moisture damage and mold formation can be caused by any one of these issues. Therefore, these issues should be checked during an inspection. Crawl space construction should ideally result in an interior crawl space floor ground surface that is at or above exterior finish grade. That does not happen in my area. Our crawl spaces are almost always below exterior grade. This is often not the case. Extra attention should be paid to foundation drainage for crawl spaces below exterior finish grade. Also, venting crawl spaces in humid conditions can result in condensation of warm, moist air on cool surfaces in the crawl space, such as ductwork, like we previously discussed. Ground cover materials, such as a thick layer of plastic laid on the crawl space floor, can become damaged or disturbed over time, resulting in loss of effectiveness. Yeah, all right. There are essentially two choices for ventilation of crawl spaces. The first follows conventional ventilation practices, and the second follows non-vented crawl space design strategy. And vented, the underfloor space between the bottom of the floor joist and the earth under any building except for a basement should have ventilation openings that allow air to pass through the exterior foundation walls. The ventilation openings should be at least 1 square foot for 150 square feet of underfloor space unless the earth ground surface is covered by a vapor retarder installed within 3 feet of each corner of the building. Class 1 vapor retarder. When a vapor retarder is installed and covers the ground, the minimum net area of the openings should be at least 1 square foot for every 1,500 square feet of underfloor space. The ventilation openings previously mentioned can be reduced from 150 square feet to 1,500 square feet, where the earth ground surface is covered by a Class 1 vapor retarder and the ventilation openings are installed. As a best practice, exposed earth or dirt on the crawl space floor should always be covered by a vapor retarder. Joints of the vapor retarder should overlap 6 inches and should be sealed or taped. The edges should extend at least 6 inches up the wall and should be secured and sealed to the wall. Non-vented or unvented crawl space. As a second option, there is mounting evidence as well as recent recognition of model building codes that non-vented crawl spaces are an acceptable method of crawl space foundation construction. The method is particularly suitable for hot, humid climates where ventilating with outdoor air actually adds moisture to the crawl space during much of the year. So this method should be considered an option in other climates. However, there's more to it than simply taking out the vents. When inspecting an unvented crawl space, the inspector should check the following factors: functional exterior grading and site drainage, air leakage between the exterior and the crawl space area, mainly at the top of the foundation wall and the floor's perimeter, insulation on the crawl space's perimeter walls and not the floor above, such as use of 2-inch rigid foam insulation on the interior side of the crawl space's perimeter wall, the use of 6 mil polyethylene ground cover in the crawl space with lapped joints, damp proof of the foundation walls, and the installation of an exterior drainage system if the crawl space's ground elevation is lower than the exterior finish grade, and some ventilation of the crawl space with conditioned air. typically from an HVAC system. Um, Recent model building codes also recommend that non-vented crawl space be treated as conditioned basement space. That is, it's supplied with conditioned air along with a return air transfer grill placed in the floor above the crawl space. Alternatively, the crawl space could be mechanically ventilated or designed as an underfloor space plenum for the distribution of conditioned air. While non-vented crawl space designs without these features have performed well, inspectors should check with local code requirements when inspecting a non-vented crawl space. The principal disadvantages of a vented crawl space. Pipes and ducts must be insulated against heat loss and freezing. A larger area usually must be insulated, which may increase the cost. And in some climates, warm, humid air circulated into the cool crawl space can actually cause excessive moisture levels in wood. All right. All right. Air leakage through building assemblies can move large quantities of water vapor and is a major factor in many vapor-related moisture problems. Building envelopes should be constructed to reduce air leakage from inside to outside in cold climates and from outside to inside in hot, humid climates. To achieve this objective, the big air leaks in the building's envelope must be sealed. Most insulation will not stop air leaks. In addition, suitable air barrier system should be carefully considered and installed during the construction of the home. Any one or a combination of the following drives air leakage: wind, stack effect, and forced air HVAC systems such as a central air handler. Wind and stack effect driven air leakage is best handled by the use of air barriers. HVAC equipment should be properly installed, and seams and connection in the distribution piping should be sealed tight. We already talked, and then this is talking about air sealing. Okay, we're going to go to the next one. We already talked about that. All right. Let's see. Okay, the amount of vapor diffusion that occurs in a building is determined by two things: the driving force that pushes it, known as the vapor diffusion differential, and the permeability of the material the vapor is passing through. Most materials, even glass, are unable to completely stop vapor diffusion. Thus, calling something a vapor barrier is a bit of a misnomer. The current trend in building science is to refer to materials as vapor retarders, meaning that while they retard or slow down the movement of water vapor, they do not completely halt the process. Materials that significantly slow down the vapor diffusion process are said to have low permeability or simply low perm. Typical building codes consider a material to be a vapor retarder if it has a perm rating of 1 or less. Here's the differences between class 1, 2, and 3 uh, vapor retarders. All right. Ventilation of interior house air. Unless properly ventilated, an airtight home can seal in indoor air pollutants. Ventilation also helps control moisture, another important consideration for a healthy, energy efficient home. Historically, homes did not have requirements for ventilation because air leaks through the building envelope and natural ventilation were considered adequate. As envelope construction techniques and materials have improved, the need to control indoor air quality in the home has increased. Today, many residential building codes require a home to have adequate mechanical ventilation systems installed with controls for the occupants to use. Each mechanical ventilation system, supply, exhaust, or both, should have a readily accessible switch or other means for shutoff or volume reduction and shutoff. Automatic or gravity dampers that close when the system is not operating should be installed at the exterior air hoods, intake, and exhaust. A home can be ventilated in the following three ways. Natural ventilation is uncontrolled air movement through the home into a home through cracks, holes, windows, and doors. This method cannot be relied upon for tightly sealed and many new construction homes. Whole house ventilation is controlled air movement using one or more fans and duct systems. Spot ventilation is controlled air movement using localized exhaust fans to quickly remove pollutants and moisture at their source. It is typically used in conjunction with one of the other strategies. Natural ventilation used to be the most common ventilation method for allowing fresh outdoor air to replace indoor air in a home. Today, it's usually not the best ventilation strategy, especially for homes that are not properly air sealed for energy efficiency. Natural ventilation also doesn't provide adequate moisture control. Whole house ventilation systems provide controlled, uniform ventilation throughout a house. These systems use one or more fans and duct systems to exhaust stale and or supply fresh air into the house. There are four types of whole house ventilation systems. Exhaust ventilation system force inside air out of a home. Force inside air out of a home. Spot ventilation is a form of exhaust ventilation. Supply ventilation systems force outside air into the home. Balanced ventilation system force equal quantities of air into and out of the home. And energy recovery ventilation systems transfer heat from incoming or outgoing air to minimize energy loss. This type of ventilation system is covered in that slide. Here's a diagram of supply ventilation. So you have supply coming in here, blowing in, and it's basically pressurizing the house and pushing the indoor air out. Here's a balanced where you have fresh air being blown in and exhaust air being pulled out. And a balanced heat recovery ventilation. So it's very similar to the balanced ventilation, but you're recovering the heat from the heat producing elements inside the home and recirculating it to make the house more energy efficient. Bathroom and spot ventilation. So your typical bathroom vent. Oh, whoa, way too fast. Windows. This is just describing the different types of windows and what they all do. We'll just kind of skip through that. Here's the different components of a window system. Pretty standard stuff. Condensation inside double pane windows. Condensation is the accumulation of liquid water on relatively cold surface. Almost all air contains water vapor, which is the gas phase of water and is composed of tiny water droplets. The molecules in warm air are far apart from one another and allow the containment of a relatively large quantity of water vapor. As air cools, its molecules get closer together and squeeze the tiny vapor droplets closer together as well. A critical temperature known as the dew point exists where these water droplets will be forced so close together that they merge into visible liquid in a process called condensation. Household air is humidified from high levels of water vapor and human and animal exhalation, plant transpiration, household appliances, fixtures such as showers, dryers. This humidity can rise significantly higher than exterior air because of the insulation design of the house. Double pane windows. Let's see. I'm sorry. Cold indoor surfaces can cool the surrounding air enough to force vapor to condense. This often happens on single pane windows because they lack the necessary thermal insulation available in higher quality windows. Double pane windows have a layer of gas, usually argon or air, trapped between the two panes of glass and should be insulated enough to prevent the accumulation of condensation. If this type of window appears misty or foggy, it means that its seal has failed and the window no longer holds its insulation rating. A desiccant is an absorptive material designed to maintain dryness within its vicinity. A common type of desiccant is silica gel, a porous plastic used to prevent spoilage in various food products, as well as supplied in the pockets of new clothing within new shoes and leather goods to prevent the accumulation of moisture during temperature extremes that are typical when such goods are shipped from their manufacturers to their distributors in distant locations. In a window, a tightly packed assortment of silica pellets is contained inside the aluminum perimeter strip to dehumidify incoming household air that is not stopped by the window seal. If not for this substance, incoming air could condense on the glass. Silica gel has an immense surface area, which allows it to absorb water vapor for years. Eventually, the silica pellets will become saturated and will no longer be able to prevent condensation from forming. A double pane window that appears foggy has failed and needs to be repaired or replaced. All right. Safety glazing. Um, So in general, each pane of glazing located in specific hazardous locations as defined in the 2018 IRC section 308 must be of the safety glazing type. The safety glazing must have a manufacturer's designation or label that is visible, permanent, and identifies the type of glass and the safety glazing standard with which it complies. Safety glass or safety glazing is a stronger, safer version of ordinary glass. It is often used in locations where human harm due to breakage is likely, such as in vehicles and in low windows. Um, if you want to get into identifying safety glazing, I would recommend pulling up your local code and reading the safety glazing code. Um, you can find it again in section 308 of the IRC. Here's more different types of doors. Garage door opener checklist. Okay, so on the right hand, the tilt-up counterweight door. Uh, the following requirement or the following content that I'm going to read is only relatable or only relates to the overhead sectional door. So keep that in mind. Let's see. If you find or observe a problematic situation with an overhead door, you should notify the homeowner and the occupants immediately and recommend they contact a trained garage door system technician. The garage door is typically the largest moving object in the house, and many of its components are under high tension. Improper installation or maintenance of a garage door can create hazardous conditions that can cause serious injury or even death. Check number one, check the manual release. Begin inside the garage, have the door closed. Check for the manual release handle. The handle should be colored red so it's easily seen. The handle should be easily accessible, no more than 6 feet above the garage floor. The handle should not be in contact with the top of vehicles. Door panels from inside the garage with the door fully closed. Check the condition of the door panels. Check for damage, cracking, denting, bulging, separation of the panels. Check the door panels for indications of fatigue. The door panels should be free of any signs of cracking. The door panels should be free of any signs of separation of materials. Warning labels. The garage doors should have the following warning labels: a spring label, a general warning label, and a label near the wall control button. 2 warning labels attached to the door in the vicinity of the bottom corner brackets. Some newer doors have tamper-resistant bottom corner brackets that do not require these warning labels. Springs and hardware. If a spring is broken, operating the door can cause serious death or injury. Do not open the door if there is damage. Visually check the door's hinges, brackets, and fasteners. If the door has an opener, the door must have an opener reinforcement bracket that is securely attached to the door's top. The header bracket of the opener rail must be securely attached to the wall or the header using lag bolts or concrete anchors. All right, and then just normal operation of the door using the button. There are different approaches to garage door operation. If you want to test the non-contact reversal test, that is your call. Me personally, I no longer check the automatic reverse on a door. We've had too many upset clients, realtors, or whatever. We do put a comment in our report that recommends testing the door on a monthly and recommend contacting the manufacturer for testing recommendations. But we personally do not test garage doors anymore. Too many have broken. There's been too much fight back and forth between realtors, sellers, and whatnot. Um, we will operate the door with the button, and that is it. And make clear observations if there's any damage or anything not installed correctly or whatever. But the rest of what is on this slide is talks about how to test the infrared eyes and how to test the non or the reversal. But again, I would recommend reading the manufacturer's installation instructions, maintenance instructions, and following the National Garage Door Installers. I think it's what it's called. I can't remember the exact acronym for it, but follow the standard for testing the doors. So, but we're not going to go over it any further. So here's the labels you should see. So again, if you should see warning labels, if you don't see warning labels, that could, we would recommend recommend having the labels put on, because as Scott Mormon just said, there are lots of things that can happen in a garage door operation and repair that can cause major damage to you or the house. We're going to skip that. Doors, egresses, and landings. Um, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, really, you should just not have any doors open over a set of stairs. I mean, there should always be a landing of some type where the door opens. And if there's not, I put it in the report, recommend to have the door reversed. And if the door can't be reversed, as long as you inform your client that it is non-standard for to have the door open over a set of stairs, you've done your due diligence, and it's up to them on how they want to handle it. Hallways and ramps. Um, you just want to make sure that you have clear width for around your main access into the home, so people in wheelchairs and I want to say like I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Assistant, like personal assistant items, or whatever. I don't know. We're gonna keep going. Again, something that you'll see often is where steps are greater than 7 3/4 inches. Walkers, thank you. Um, You're going to find that quite often. Steps, people pour concrete steps and they do it as a DIY project. They don't do the correct measurements, all that kind of stuff. So, the one thing I'm going to tell you about this and why this is so important as having consistent rise and runs and, widths of your steps is there was a video I watched early on in my career, and there was some subway stairs in New York, and every step was exactly the same. It had no more than a 1/4 inch difference between each step, and people get in a cadence when they're going up and down steps. And then there was one step that was I think it was an inch off. I think it was an inch taller than the rest of the steps. And somebody took a video of people coming up and down those subway stairs, and almost everybody that was walking up those stairs hit their foot on that one step that was slightly taller, and a lot of them, had their hands full of stuff or they fell. They're a lot of, because of the width of the steps, they didn't have a handrail going up the middle. And then people, a lot of times, you don't want to use the handrail for, especially when COVID hit and stuff like that, people were really wary of using common handrails and stuff. So that they didn't get used a lot. And so that just tells you that just a slight variation in one step can cause somebody to fall, especially when you're talking about older clients or you're doing an aging in place inspection and trying to help clients that are, getting up in years or retiring. It's really important as, you have standard, consistent steps. I've had several friends who have had family members who, in their own home, their stairs were not consistent. Maybe they hit a little bit of water, they didn't have a handrail or whatever, and then they fell, hit their head, and a few people have passed away. So, steps are very hazardous. I don't know, James. I think, there's probably exceptions for whatever reason. You would probably have to look up what those exceptions are. Um, anyway, we'll skip through the video. Guards, railings. So, you want to make sure that you have no more than 4 inches of separation on the safety railing. You have no more than 4 3/8 on your guardrail, on your stair rail, and you cannot fit more than a 6-inch sphere between the triangle right here. All of this is to make sure that children and pets don't, get their head stuck, get their body stuck, or fall through, or whatever. I have a great picture, and probably, I don't know if it's on another diagram, but I have a great picture of horizontal railings or horizontal spindles on a safety railing, and there's a baby climbing, and it's a real life picture, it's not an AI picture. There's a baby using those horizontal spindles on a safety railing to climb up. Babies are naturally curious. They like to climb. I know my daughter, when she was little, she liked climbing our chain link fence. She's just a challenge for her. So it's innate that children are inquisitive and they like to challenge and they will try to climb. So even though it's pretty standard across the board now on new construction that, you got those cable systems or chicken wire that's used as railings or whatever. I always call it out and just make my first question to the client is, hey, are you going to have any children in this house at all? Family, friends, or whatever? If there is, I recommend you upgrade this to vertical spindles and take out the horizontal portions. That's just on me, but that's the reason of it. Hand grips. This is another thing that I constantly call out is, people like to use a 2x6 as the handrail on decks. Laid vertically and use that as a handrail. That is not an acceptable hand grip on a set of stairs. You have to have something grippable, something you can pinch your fingers around, so that if you do trip, you do fall, you can easily grab something with. Instead of being the fingers on the outside, which can slide off, you actually have the grip of your fingertips around. So I'm always looking for that on new construction, especially on decks. Above and below the stairs, measure the headroom. Headroom above the stairs, headroom is measured vertically. Above the slope, plane adjoining the tread nosing or from the floor surface of the landing of the platform. The headroom in all parts of the staircase should not be less than 6 feet 8 inches. Spiral stairways should have a headroom of at least 6 feet 6 inches. I find this a lot, especially on crawl spaces or unfinished basements where maybe there wasn't a set of stairs that were added. Um, uh, you'll see headroom and as long as you call it out, you identify you tell the homeowner, hey, this is lower than 6 feet 8 inches, and and let them figure out if they want to modify or if they just want to put up a cut in half pool noodle on the on that header above there, which is pretty common, or just put a watch your head sticker. That's a lot of times what I'll see when that headroom is lower than expected. Let's see. Landings. What time? What are we doing on time? Oh my gosh, we're almost done. Okay, so let me get through here. Emergency escape and rescue openings. Um, you know, when I do an inspection, if I'm in a basement or a walkout basement or whatever, and my first indication is I go down and they just have um a square window or a rectangle window that's at the top, And that's when my spider sense kind of gets triggered, and I'm like, okay, well, definitely, is this a bedroom? Is this a storage room? And I start evaluating that way. So it just feels like, if I can't climb out of it, if it's too high up off the ground or the window area is too small, that's when I start to get into the details of what is the clear opening area, how high is it off the ground. Those are my indicators that then I'll go and take my measurements and evaluate the that for emergency escape and rescue. Um, let's see here. Floors, walls, and ceilings. I've already kind of hit on all this. Here's videos. Okay, so here's the pictures that I wanted to show you because we're about 10 minutes from finishing up here. So one of the student or one of the attendees asked earlier about the craft side of the vapor barrier in a crawl space and where it should be located. So this picture over here on the left, this is a floor bay in a crawl space. I pulled the insulation back, so the craft face of the paper was on the crawl space side, not on the subfloor side, right? So what ended up happening, you can see the plumbing joint here. This plumbing drain had a leak on it. And because the craft face was installed over the bottom of the floor joist here on both sides, the water was not allowed to drain into the crawl space. The craft the craft paper actually kept the moisture inside the fiberglass insulation, and it stayed against, and it basically created its own little sauna in that floor bay, and then just a little bit of mold. I don't know what type of mold this was. I didn't test it at this time, but that little bit of mold colonized like crazy. So this is all mold against the subfloor um, in this crawl space. So this is the best indicator of why the craft paper needs to be against the floor. So if there was a leak against the floor, or if the paper face was against the subfloor, then it would travel, it would have come through the craft face into the insulation and then would have dripped out of the insulation. You would have seen it. But the craft face actually kept the water inside the insulation and kept it against the subfloor, and that's what created this mold colony. Um, Here is your yeah, this is an attic picture with box vents in the attic, and this is very common because you have warm air that's expelling out of those box vents, basically any any penetration. So you have your bathroom vents, your dryer vents, your box vents, any type of ventilation. They're all expelling warm air out of them, from the bathroom or from the kitchen or hot air from the attic. Well, birds really love that warm air. And so if the vent has been damaged or the screening has been damaged on any of those, or if it was never installed, that's where those birds like to nest and eventually will block that up. You know, will will cause all kinds of problems. So, any penetration, you always want to make sure there's a bird screen. Something like that will stop any type of nesting from happening in those areas. And if it's damaged, it obviously needs to be repaired. And then this picture on the right-hand side, this is this $2 million custom three-story house where over half of the windows were had moisture intrusion because the zip tape flashing was not installed correctly. It was sloppy. It was, they didn't roll it like they're supposed to. It had bird mouse all over it. It was not layered correctly. So where it was not shingle flat, or it was not shingle installed where you have the bottom layer or the top layer above the bottom layer. And so all of those things led to moisture intrusion around, at probably 20 to 30 windows. And again, we had to call the contractor back out three times, and ended up putting up 3 to 4 different layers of zip tape flashing around every window, which eventually stopped the water from coming in. And then they bricked over the top of it. So again, it doesn't like $150,000 house to a $2 million house. A lot of times the contractors that are building this stuff are the same. And they're going to use the same processes and use the same materials in the same way, and you're going to have the same problems. Just in the larger house, you're going to have more of it, and it's going to be more costly. So, those are three things that we find a lot. And I'm sure you guys have all different kinds of other observations, but anyway, that's that's the class, and thank you for coming. Any questions I did not hit? Um, do we cite code about all the railing, stairwell railing system noted as a deficiency? I do not. I would not recommend citing code at all. Now, so there's a thing that I tell my inspectors all the time. When you set the precedence, so setting the precedence means you are consistently doing something over and over again. Like calling out an aesthetic defect. So say you call out damage on the inside of a drywall. Uh, if you do not call out damage on drywall in every other part of the house, a lawyer can then use you called out that interior damage on that drywall over here, but you didn't call out the interior damage on the drywall over here. Well, we want you to pay that now. So the lawyer is going to tell you, hey, you set the precedence by calling out this material or this aesthetic defect over here. Now you're required to call out that aesthetic defect everywhere. So and use the same concept for calling out code. If you call out code on one item, a lawyer can then say, well, he called out code here. Why didn't he call out code for the rest of this stuff? And they can use that against you. So I would be very careful setting that precedence. You just want to limit your liability, but still do a good job. All right, guys, I appreciate you coming. It was great having you here. And uh, if you need anything, you have any questions for me, you can reach me at admin. Here, let me go to this next page. You can reach me at admin@tradexuniversity.org, and I would be happy to help.